The phone call came at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was reviewing classified briefings for tomorrow's strategic planning session. My mother's voice was shaking with rage and tears, each word cutting through the secure line like shrapnel. "You abandoned your family, Jade. Your own sister's wedding, your father's heart surgery, and now this. How can you choose strangers over your own blood?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What my mother didn't know, as she sobbed accusations into the phone, was that I wasn't choosing anything. The deployment orders sitting on my desk weren't a request or an opportunity. They were a direct command from the Pentagon. And the strangers she thought I was choosing over family were 847 American soldiers whose lives depended on the intelligence operations I'd been tasked to coordinate in Kandahar Province. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Jade Raven, and this is the story of how my family spent 15 years thinking my military service was a career choice I could turn on and off like a light switch, only to discover that duty to country sometimes means sacrificing everything you love for people you'll never meet. It started the day I enlisted at 18. I can still picture my mother's face when I walked into the kitchen wearing my Army recruitment paperwork, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, as she processed what I was telling her. "The military?" she said, like I'd announced I was joining a circus. "Jade, honey, you're smart enough for college. You could be a teacher, a nurse, something normal." Normal. That word would haunt our relationship for the next 15 years. To my family, normal meant staying close to home in Millfield, Oregon, getting married to someone from town, having kids who could play with their cousins, building a life that fit into their understanding of how families should work. The military wasn't normal. It was an inconvenience that took me away from family gatherings, birthday parties, and the gradual progression of milestones that marked normal people's lives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father, Robert Raven, tried to be supportive in his quiet way, but I could see the confusion in his eyes every time I came home in uniform. He'd served briefly in Vietnam, but that was different. He'd been drafted, done his time, and come home to build the life he'd always planned. He understood military service as something you endured, not something you chose as a career. "It's good experience," he'd tell relatives who asked about my military phase. "Jade's getting discipline, learning skills. When she's ready to settle down, she'll have that background to draw on." When she's ready to settle down. As if my career was just an elaborate preparation for the real life that would begin when I decided to be normal. My younger sister, Ashley, was the family's golden child, following the script everyone understood. College at Oregon State, engagement to her high school sweetheart, Derek, a teaching job at Millfield Elementary, a house 3 blocks from where we'd grown up. She was everything my mother had hoped for in a daughter: present, predictable, and perpetually available for family obligations. "Ashley's engagement party is next month," my mother would say during our weekly phone calls. "I know you're busy with your Army thing, but this is important, Jade. Family has to come first sometimes." My Army thing. 15 years of service, and she still talked about it like a hobby I'd picked up in college. The problem with military intelligence work is that most of what you do is classified. You can't come home from work and tell your family about the terrorist cell you helped dismantle, or the attack you prevented, or the American lives you saved through careful analysis of intercepted communications. So to my family, my career was invisible. They knew I had a job that required me to travel frequently and couldn't be discussed in detail, but they had no framework for understanding what that actually meant. When I made captain at 25, my mother's reaction was polite congratulations, followed by, "That's wonderful, honey. Do you think you'll be ready to come home and start a real career soon?" A real career. Not saving American lives or protecting national security or developing expertise in counterterrorism operations. A real career meant something they could understand and explain to their friends at church. When I was promoted to major at 30, the family celebration lasted about 5 minutes before the conversation shifted to Ashley's pregnancy and whether I'd be able to come home for the baby shower. I know your schedule is unpredictable, but some things are more important than work, you know? This baby is going to be your nephew or niece. Some things are more important than work. As if my work was filing paperwork or attending meetings, not coordinating intelligence operations that kept American soldiers alive in combat zones. I tried to explain, in the vague terms that security clearances allowed, that my responsibilities were increasing, that I was being trusted with more complex and critical missions. But without details, it just sounded like corporate ambition to them. Everyone thinks their job is important, but at the end,
The breaking point came 2 years ago, during what should have been a joyful family celebration. Ashley was getting married, a big church wedding with 200 guests, 6 months of planning, and the kind of elaborate celebration that my mother had dreamed about since Ashley was born. I'd requested leave 6 months in advance, blocked out the dates, made sure my team could cover my responsibilities. Everything was arranged. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, our intelligence network intercepted communications about a planned attack on American forces in Syria. The details were fragmentary, coded, and required immediate analysis by someone with my specific background in Middle Eastern terrorist organizations. I was the only available analyst with the necessary security clearance and regional expertise. The orders came directly from the Pentagon. Report for immediate deployment to support Operation Desert Shield. Duration? Indefinite. Priority? Critical to American lives. I called my mother from the secure briefing room at Fort Braxton, trying to explain that I wouldn't be able to attend Ashley's wedding. "What do you mean you can't come? Jade, this is your sister's wedding. This is the most important day of her life." "Mom, I don't have a choice. These are orders from the Pentagon. American soldiers' lives are at risk. There has to be someone else who can do whatever it is you do. You're not the only person in the Army." How could I explain that there weren't someone else? That my years of specialized training, my security clearance, my experience with this specific terrorist network made me irreplaceable for this particular mission?
Work-life balance. As if protecting national security was just an imbalanced lifestyle choice rather than a calling that required total commitment. Which brings us to yesterday's phone call, the one that started this whole confrontation about abandonment and family loyalty. Ashley is pregnant again, her second child, due in 6 weeks. My father has been having heart problems, irregular rhythms that might require surgery. My mother has been coordinating family schedules, trying to arrange for everyone to be available for the birth and for whatever medical procedures my father might need. Everyone except me. Because yesterday morning, I received deployment orders for Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Not a request, not an opportunity for advancement, but a direct order from the Secretary of Defense to lead an intelligence operation that could determine the success or failure of ongoing military operations in the region. The briefing was classified, but the general outline was clear. Terrorist organizations in Afghanistan had developed new communication networks that were allowing them to coordinate attacks on American forces. My expertise in Middle Eastern terrorist communications made me the ideal candidate to analyze these networks and develop countermeasures. The deployment was scheduled to last 8 months, beginning next week. 8 months that would cover Ashley's due date, my father's potential heart surgery, and every major family event between now and next Christmas. When I called to explain the situation,
My mother's reaction was immediate and devastating. "You're abandoning your family, Jade. Your sister needs you, your father might need heart surgery, and you're choosing to go halfway around the world to do a job that someone else could do just as well." "Mom, these aren't optional orders. When the Pentagon tells you to deploy, you deploy. That's how military service works." "Don't give me that military service excuse. You've been using that for 15 years to justify putting your career ahead of your family." Military service excuse. 15 years of sacrifice, and she was calling it an excuse? "Mom, this isn't about career advancement. This is about preventing terrorist attacks against American soldiers." "There are thousands of people in the military, Jade. You're not the only one who can do intelligence work. You're choosing this assignment because you'd rather play soldier than deal with family responsibilities." Play soldier. That's what she thought I'd been doing for 15 years, playing soldier instead of accepting adult responsibilities. What if Ashley goes into early labor? What if Dad needs emergency surgery? What if something happens and you're on the other side of the world playing army games? Army games. Operations that protected American lives were army games to her. "Jade, I need you to refuse this assignment. I need you to tell them that your family needs you here." "I can't refuse deployment orders, Mom. That's not how the military works." "Then maybe it's time to get out of the military. Maybe it's time to choose your family over your Army career." Choose your family over your Army career. As if 15 years of service could be discarded whenever family obligations became inconvenient. "Mom, I took an oath. I swore to protect and defend this country. That oath doesn't have exceptions for family emergencies." "That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard you say, Jade Raven. Your oath to strangers matters more to you than your obligations to people who love you." She hung up on me. I sat in my office, staring at deployment orders that would take me to one of the most dangerous places on Earth, trying to reconcile 15 years of military service with a family that saw my career as selfish abandonment of people who needed me. The classified briefing materials on my desk outlined terrorist threats that could kill hundreds of American soldiers if not properly analyzed and countered. My expertise in this specific area of intelligence work was why I'd been chosen for this deployment, why my presence in Afghanistan was considered critical to mission success. But to my family, I was just choosing strangers over blood, career over love, military games over adult responsibilities. Tomorrow, I would board a military transport to Kandahar Province, carrying the weight of my family's disappointment and the knowledge that my absence might cost relationships that couldn't be repaired. But I would also be carrying the expertise that might save American lives, the intelligence background that might prevent terrorist attacks, the specialized knowledge that made me uniquely qualified for this mission. The choice between duty and family wasn't really a choice at all. It was the fundamental tension that defined military service, the sacrifice that came with the oath I'd taken 15 years ago. My family would never understand that some responsibilities transcend personal preferences, that military service sometimes requires choosing the greater good over individual happiness. But understanding their disappointment didn't make it hurt any less. And as I prepared for deployment to Afghanistan, I wondered if there would be any family left to come home to when the mission was complete. The flight to Kandahar took 18 hours with stops in Germany and Qatar. 18 hours to think about my mother's words, to process the accusation that I was abandoning my family for strangers, to wrestle with 15 years of guilt about missing birthday parties and graduations and weddings. But it also gave me time to review the classified briefings that explained exactly why my presence in Afghanistan was critical to American security.
The terrorist communication networks we'd intercepted weren't random chatter. They were coordinated plans for a series of attacks targeting American supply convoys. Attacks that could kill or wound hundreds of soldiers if we couldn't decode the operational details and warn field commanders in time.
My family saw my deployment as choosing strangers over blood. But those soldiers weren't strangers. They were someone else's children, siblings, parents. They deserved to come home alive just as much as I deserved to be at Ashley's baby shower. Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan was exactly as grim as I'd expected. Concrete barriers, armed guards, the constant sound of helicopters and transport planes. The kind of place where you're reminded every moment that you're in a war zone, where American lives are at risk every single day. My new commanding officer, Colonel David Torres, briefed me within hours of my arrival. The situation was more urgent than the Pentagon briefings had indicated. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, we've intercepted communications suggesting coordinated attacks on 3 different supply routes over the next 2 weeks. The problem is that the communications are using coded references we haven't been able to decode. He spread intercepted messages across the briefing table, documents covered in Arabic script mixed with cultural references that seemed meaningless without proper context. This is why we need your expertise. You've worked with similar communication patterns in Syria and Iraq. We need to understand what these messages mean before American soldiers start dying. I studied the intercepted communications, recognizing linguistic patterns I'd seen before, references to harvest season that probably meant timing for attacks, mentions of wedding gifts that likely referred to explosives or weapons, cultural metaphors that terrorists use to disguise operational planning from American intelligence. Colonel, these aren't just random attack plans. This looks like coordination for a major offensive, something that could affect multiple bases and supply routes simultaneously. How long do you need to provide actionable intelligence? I looked at the complexity of the coded messages, the cultural references that would require careful analysis, the need to cross-reference with other intelligence sources. Give me 72 hours, but I'll need complete access to all intercepted communications from the past 6 months, plus liaison with field commanders who can provide tactical context. Done. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, I want you to understand something. The operations you're analyzing could affect the safety of over 800 American soldiers currently deployed in this region. We're counting on your expertise to keep them alive. 800 soldiers. 800 families back home who were counting on people like me to bring their loved ones home safely. That night, in my temporary quarters at Bagram, I called home using the secure military communication system. It was early morning in Oregon, but I knew Ashley would be awake. Pregnancy insomnia had been keeping her up nights. Jade? Oh my God, are you okay? Where are you calling from? I can't say exactly where, but I'm safe. How are you feeling? How's the baby? I'm fine, tired, worried about you. Mom told me about your fight. She's really upset, Jade. She thinks you chose this deployment to avoid dealing with family obligations. Family obligations? Ashley, you know me better than that. You know I wouldn't choose to be away from family unless it was absolutely necessary. I know, but God, Jade, what if something happens to you over there? What if you get hurt or killed while we're all angry at each other? The fear in her voice was real and heartbreaking. Ashley had always worried about my deployments, but she'd never expressed it so directly before. I'm not in combat, Ashley. I work with intelligence analysis. It's safer than you think. But you're in Afghanistan. That's not safe, no matter what kind of work you're doing. She was right, of course. Nowhere in Afghanistan was truly safe for American personnel. Even intelligence analysts faced risks from rocket attacks, suicide bombers, and the general chaos of operating in a war zone. Ashley, I need you to understand something. The work I'm doing here isn't optional. American soldiers' lives depend on the intelligence analysis my team provides. I understand that your work is important, Jade, but our family needs you too. Dad's having more heart problems, and the doctors think he might need surgery sooner than expected. My stomach dropped. How serious is it? Serious enough that Mom wants all of us to be available in case something happens. She's terrified that if Dad has a heart attack or needs emergency surgery, you'll be on the other side of the world. I sat in my sparse military quarters, 8,000 miles from home, trying to balance concern for my father's health with the knowledge that 800 soldiers were counting on my expertise to stay alive. Ashley, if Dad's condition becomes critical, if he needs emergency surgery, I'll do everything I can to get emergency leave. And what if the Army says no? What if they say your intelligence work is too important to interrupt? I didn't have an answer for that because she was right. If the terrorist threat analysis was at a critical stage, if my presence was essential to preventing attacks, the military wouldn't grant emergency leave just because my father needed heart surgery. I'll figure it out, Ashley, I promise. Jade, maybe Mom is right. Maybe it's time to think about getting out of the Army. You've served 15 years. You could have a normal career, be available when family needs you. A normal career. The same conversation we'd been having for 15 years. Ashley, I can't abandon 800 soldiers because our family wants me to have a normal schedule. But you can abandon us? The question hung in the air between us, 8,000 miles of distance and 15 years of accumulated resentment. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Because from here, it looks like you care more about soldiers you've never met than about the family that raised you. I worked 18-hour days for the next week, analyzing intercepted communications with the help of cultural attachés and linguistic specialists. The coded references were more complex than I had initially realized, involving not just operational planning, but coordination between multiple terrorist organizations.
The harvest season references weren't just about timing. They indicated a specific type of coordinated attack designed to maximize casualties among American forces. The wedding gifts weren't just weapons. They were sophisticated explosive devices that could be disguised as humanitarian supplies. Most critically, I discovered that the planned attacks weren't random targets. The terrorists had identified specific vulnerabilities in American supply routes, patterns in convoy timing, and weaknesses in base security that suggested inside intelligence or sophisticated surveillance. Colonel Torres, I said during our morning briefing, this isn't just a series of planned attacks. This is a comprehensive offensive designed to inflict maximum casualties on American forces while disrupting our entire logistical network in the region. How many soldiers are at risk? If these attacks succeed, we're looking at potential casualties in the hundreds. But more than that, they could cut off supply lines that support thousands of American personnel across multiple bases. Torres studied my analysis, the charts showing attack vectors, the timeline indicating coordinated strikes across a 2-week period. What do you recommend? Immediate tactical changes to convoy routes and timing, enhanced security for the 3 bases they've identified as primary targets, and a proactive operation to disrupt their communication network before they can execute the final coordination. Can you identify the key communication nodes? I pointed to the analysis I'd prepared, showing how the terrorist communication flowed through specific individuals and locations. Take out these 3 communication hubs, and we can disrupt their coordination enough to prevent the coordinated attacks. They might still attempt individual operations, but they won't be able to execute the comprehensive offensive they've planned. Colonel Torres immediately began coordinating with field commanders to implement the tactical changes I'd recommended. Within 6 hours, American forces had adjusted convoy routes, increased base security, and begun operations targeting the terrorist communication network. That evening, alone in my quarters, I felt the satisfaction that came from preventing a catastrophe. 800 soldiers would be safer because of the intelligence analysis I'd provided. Hundreds of families back home wouldn't receive the devastating phone calls that came when operations went wrong. But I also felt the weight of missing my father's cardiology appointment, Ashley's prenatal checkup, and the 1,000 small family moments that were happening without me.
3 days later, at 0300 local time, I received an emergency call from home. Ashley's voice was shaking with panic and exhaustion. Jade, Dad's in the hospital. He had chest pains last night, and they think he might have had a mild heart attack. The doctors want to do surgery tomorrow morning. My father, having emergency heart surgery while I was 8,000 miles away, analyzing terrorist communications in a war zone. How serious is it? They don't know yet. The cardiologist says it could be routine bypass surgery, or it could be more complicated depending on what they find. She's not handling it well, Jade. She keeps saying that you should be here, that family comes first. Ashley, I'm going to request emergency leave. I'll do everything I can to get home. What if they say no? What if the army won't let you leave? It was the question I'd been dreading. What if my commanding officer determined that my intelligence analysis was too critical to interrupt? What if the terrorist threat required my continued presence in Afghanistan? I'll figure it out, Ashley. I promise I'll find a way to be there. After the call, I sat in the darkness of my quarters trying to reconcile two competing responsibilities: my duty to the American soldiers whose lives depended on my intelligence analysis, and my duty to a family that needed me during a medical crisis. I called Colonel Torres at 0600 requesting an emergency meeting to discuss emergency leave. Colonel Raven, I understand your family situation and I'm sympathetic, but you need to understand our operational situation. The intelligence analysis you've provided has prevented what could have been the deadliest coordinated attack on American forces in this region in over 2 years. Sir, my father is having emergency heart surgery. My family needs me. And 800 American soldiers need you here. The terrorist communication network is still active, still planning attacks. We've disrupted their major offensive, but they're adapting, changing their communication patterns. You're the only analyst with the expertise to track their new operational planning. Colonel Torres wasn't being cruel. He was making the same impossible calculation that defined military service, weighing individual needs against collective security, personal obligations against professional duties. Sir, how long do you estimate before we've neutralized the terrorist communication threat? Honestly, at least another month, maybe 2. These organizations are sophisticated, well-funded, and highly motivated. Disrupting their communication network is going to require sustained intelligence analysis. Another month. My father's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and I was being told that national security required my presence in Afghanistan for at least another month. Lieutenant Colonel, I can arrange for communication access so you can stay in touch with your family during your father's surgery, but I cannot approve extended leave while American lives are at stake. That night, I called Ashley again to explain that I wouldn't be able to come home for Dad's surgery. Her reaction was immediate and devastating. Jade, this is exactly what Mom said would happen. She said that when our family really needed you, the Army would be more important. Ashley, it's not that the Army is more important. It's that I have responsibilities here that I can't abandon. But what about your responsibilities to us? What about your responsibility to Dad, who raised you and supported you and worried about you for 15 years? Of course I have responsibilities to family, but I also have responsibilities to people who are counting on me to keep them alive. Those people aren't your family, Jade. We are, and we need you here. Ashley, there are 800 American soldiers in Afghanistan whose families need them to come home alive. Those families are depending on intelligence analysis that prevents attacks. I can't abandon those people just because our family is facing a crisis. So you're choosing them over us.
I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else. I'm trying to fulfill obligations that don't have easy solutions. Jade, if something happens to Dad during surgery, if he dies while you're in Afghanistan analyzing terrorist communications, will it have been worth it? The question hit me like a physical blow. Would preventing attacks on American soldiers be worth losing my father while I was deployed?
Would saving the lives of people I'd never met justify missing the final moments with someone who'd loved me my entire life? Ashley, I don't know how to answer that question. Maybe that's the problem, Jade. Maybe after 15 years of putting the army first, you don't remember how to put family first. She hung up, leaving me alone in my quarters with classified intelligence reports and the knowledge that my father would undergo heart surgery tomorrow morning, while I was 8,000 miles away, doing work that my family saw as choosing strangers over blood. But as I returned to analyzing intercepted terrorist communications, trying to identify new threats to American forces, I also knew that this work wasn't about choosing strangers over family. It was about understanding that sometimes duty requires sacrificing personal happiness for the greater good. That military service means accepting responsibility for people you'll never meet. That the oath I'd taken 15 years ago didn't have exceptions for family emergencies. My family would never understand that distinction. To them, I was abandoning people who loved me for a career that kept me away from everything that mattered. But sitting in that military quarters in Afghanistan, surrounded by intelligence that could prevent American deaths, I knew that both things could be true simultaneously. I could love my family desperately and still choose duty over personal obligation. I could wish I was home with my father and still know that my presence in Afghanistan was saving lives. The weight of that contradiction was crushing, but it was also the fundamental reality of military service that my family had never understood. Tomorrow, my father would have heart surgery without me, and I would continue analyzing terrorist communications, trying to prevent attacks that could kill soldiers who were someone else's children, someone else's family. Both choices would have consequences I'd carry for the rest of my life. My father's surgery lasted 6 hours. I spent those 6 hours in my quarters at Bagram Airfield, alternating between analyzing intercepted terrorist communications and staring at my phone, waiting for updates from home. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was 8,000 miles away trying to prevent terrorist attacks, my family was experiencing their own crisis in an Oregon hospital, counting down minutes and praying for successful surgery. Ashley texted updates every hour. 2 p.m. Surgery started. Doctor says it could take 4 to 6 hours. 3 p.m. Still in surgery. Mom is a wreck. 4 p.m. No news yet. Derek is here with me. Wish you were here too. 5 p.m. Doctor says surgery is going well, but taking longer than expected. 6 p.m. Still waiting. Mom keeps asking where you are. Each text was a reminder of my absence, of the choice I'd made to prioritize intelligence work over family crisis. But each intercepted terrorist communication I analyzed was a reminder that lives were at stake here too, that my expertise was preventing attacks that could kill hundreds of American soldiers. At 7:15 p.m. Oregon time, Ashley called with the news I'd been praying for. Dad made it through surgery. The doctor says it went better than expected. They were able to do a triple bypass and his heart function should improve significantly. I felt a relief so profound it left me shaking. Thank God! How is he? Can I talk to him? He's still unconscious from anesthesia, but the doctor says his vital signs are strong. Jade, Mom wants to talk to you. My stomach clenched. I'd been dreading this conversation since I'd learned about Dad's surgery. Jade, my mother's voice was exhausted but cold, carrying 15 years of accumulated resentment. Mom, I'm so glad Dad's okay. I was terrified. Were you? Because you weren't here, Jade. Your father almost died today and you weren't here. Mom, I wanted to be there. You know I wanted to be there. No, I don't know that. What I know is that when your family needed you most, you chose your army career over us. Again. The deployment orders weren't optional. Stop! Just stop with the military excuses, Jade! Do you know what your father said when he was going into surgery? He said he wished he could see all his children one more time, just in case. All his children, Jade, but one of them was on the other side of the world playing soldier. Playing soldier. The phrase hit like a slap, reducing 15 years of military service to a child's game that I prioritized over adult responsibilities. Mom, the work I'm doing here is critical. American soldiers' lives depend on... I don't care about American soldiers, she exploded. I care about my family. I care about my husband who almost died today while his daughter was too busy with her army games to be here. The line went quiet except for her crying. Jade, I have to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Do you even want to be part of this family anymore? Because it seems like you've found people who matter more to you than we do. The question was devastating because I couldn't answer it in a way that would satisfy her. Yes, I wanted to be part of the family, but not at the cost of abandoning responsibilities that kept other people's family members alive. Of course I want to be part of this family. Then prove it. Come home. Tell the army that your father needs you, that your sister needs you, that your family is more important than whatever it is you're doing over there. I can't. Then don't call us again until you can. I can't keep having conversations where you explain why strangers are more important to you than people who love you.
She hung up. I sat alone in my quarters, staring at intelligence reports that detailed terrorist plans to kill American soldiers, trying to reconcile my family's pain with the knowledge that my work was saving lives they would never see or understand. Over the next 2 weeks, as my father recovered and my intelligence analysis continued to prevent attacks, the family situation deteriorated completely. My mother stopped taking my calls. Ashley's texts became increasingly resentful. Even Derek, my brother-in-law, who'd always been supportive of my military career, began expressing doubts about my priorities. Ashley, Dad's doing better, but he keeps asking about you. It breaks my heart every time. Ashley, Mom says you've made your choice. She says if the army matters more to you than family, then you can let the army be your family. Ashley, I'm starting to think she might be right, Jade. 15 years of missed holidays, missed birthdays, missed weddings, missed emergencies. When is enough enough? Meanwhile, the intelligence work in Afghanistan was reaching a critical phase. The terrorist networks had adapted to our disruption of their communication systems, developing new codes and operational procedures that required constant analysis. Colonel Torres briefed me daily on the evolving threat. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, your analysis has prevented 3 separate attacks over the past 2 weeks, but they're learning, adapting, becoming more sophisticated in their communication security. What's the current threat assessment? We're seeing increased chatter about a major operation planned for next month, something they're calling the final harvest. We need to understand what that means before American soldiers start dying. The final harvest. Another coded reference that required my expertise in terrorist communication patterns to decode properly. Sir, I need to ask about the possibility of brief emergency leave. My father had heart surgery and my family is... They're having difficulty understanding why I can't come home. Colonel Torres looked at me with sympathy, but his response was firm. Lieutenant Colonel, I understand your family situation, and I wish I could help. But the intelligence you're providing is literally saving American lives every day. Until we neutralize this terrorist threat, your presence here is critical to mission success. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my sister using an unsecured line from the base communication center, hoping to explain the situation in terms she might understand. Jade, I need you to understand something about what I'm doing here. Jade, I don't want to hear about your important army work. Dad almost died and you weren't here. That's all I need to understand. Please, just listen for a minute. The intelligence work I'm doing isn't paperwork or bureaucracy.
It's preventing terrorist attacks that would kill American soldiers. How many soldiers? The question surprised me. What? You said your work prevents attacks that would kill American soldiers. How many soldiers? I thought about the operations I'd helped prevent, the intelligence that had saved lives. Over the past 2 weeks, the analysis I've provided has prevented attacks that could have killed or wounded hundreds of people. Hundreds? Ashley, the terrorists we were tracking were planning coordinated attacks on multiple American bases in this region. If we hadn't intercepted their communications and disrupted their operational planning, we could have been looking at casualties in the hundreds, maybe thousands. There was a long pause. You're saying that if you came home for Dad's surgery, soldiers would have died? I'm saying that the intelligence analysis I provide is critical to keeping American forces safe. My expertise in terrorist communication isn't easily replaceable overnight. But there are other intelligence analysts, right? Other people who could do similar work? Ashley, there are maybe 5 people in the entire military with my specific expertise in Middle Eastern terrorist communication networks. I've spent 15 years developing knowledge that can't be transferred to someone else overnight. Another pause. So when you miss family events, when you can't come home for emergencies, it's because people would die if you weren't doing your job? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Why didn't you ever tell us that? Because most of what I do is classified. I can't discuss specific operations or detailed threat assessments. All I could say was that my work was important to national security. Important to national security sounds like government paperwork, Jade. Preventing terrorist attacks that kill hundreds of soldiers sounds like something completely different. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like someone in my family was beginning to understand what military intelligence work actually involved. Ashley, every deployment, every missed holiday, every emergency I couldn't attend, it was because the alternative was letting American soldiers die in attacks we could have prevented. Jesus, Jade, we had no idea. We thought your job was like any other government job, just with more travel and bureaucracy. Most military families understand that deployments aren't optional, that service members can't just take time off when family needs them. But you've never been around military culture. You've never seen how these decisions actually work. So when Mom says you're choosing strangers over family, I'm choosing to prevent the deaths of people who are someone else's children, someone else's family members. They're not strangers, Ashley. They're American soldiers serving their country, just like I am. I could hear Ashley crying softly. Jade, I need to tell you something. Something that's going to make you angry. What? Derek's brother is deployed in Afghanistan, Army infantry, somewhere near Kandahar. When you told me you were being deployed there, I didn't connect it. I didn't realize your work might be protecting people like Kevin. Kevin? A name. A person. Someone Ashley knew and cared about. Ashley, the intelligence analysis I've been doing has prevented attacks on multiple American bases in this region. There's a good chance that work has helped keep Derek's brother safe. Oh my God! The terrorists we've been tracking were planning attacks specifically designed to kill American infantry soldiers, operations that would have targeted bases where people like Kevin are stationed. The line was quiet for a long moment.
Jade, Mom doesn't know about Kevin's deployment. Derek's family asked us not to discuss it because his mother is already terrified about him being in Afghanistan. But you understand now why I couldn't come home. I'm starting to, but Jade, you have to understand our perspective too. For 15 years, we've watched you miss every important family event. We've never understood why your job couldn't be flexible when family needed you. Military service isn't flexible, Ashley. When you take the oath, when you accept the responsibility, personal preferences become irrelevant when lives are at stake. But we didn't know lives were at stake. We thought you were choosing career advancement over family obligations. Career advancement. That's what they'd thought my deployments represented. Ashley, I need you to understand something. Every deployment, every missed holiday, every time I couldn't come home for an emergency, it was because staying would have meant that other families might lose someone they loved. I think I'm beginning to understand that,
But Mom? Jade, Mom is so angry. She's convinced that you've chosen the army over us permanently. 3 days later, everything exploded. Ashley had apparently shared our conversation with Derek, who then told his brother Kevin's unit commander about the intelligence analyst who was working to prevent attacks on American forces in the Kandahar region. Word got back to Colonel Torres, who called me into his office with an expression I'd never seen before. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, I've received an unusual communication from a family member of one of the soldiers your intelligence work is protecting. My stomach dropped. Sir? Your brother-in-law's brother is serving with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. His commanding officer wanted me to know that the intelligence analysis you've been providing has directly contributed to preventing attacks that would have targeted his unit. I didn't know about that connection when I spoke with my family. I understand that. But, Lieutenant Colonel Raven, what concerns me is that you discussed classified operations with family members who don't have security clearance. I realized my mistake immediately. In trying to help Ashley understand why I couldn't come home, I'd revealed operational details that should have remained classified. Sir, I understand the security concerns. It won't happen again. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, I'm not questioning your professionalism or your commitment to operational security, but this situation illustrates exactly why personal relationships can compromise military effectiveness. What do you mean? I mean that your family obligations are interfering with your ability to maintain operational security and focus on mission requirements. The implication was clear. My family relationships were becoming a security liability. Sir, my family situation won't interfere with mission performance again. I hope that's true, because the terrorist threat we're tracking has evolved into something even more serious than we initially understood. Colonel Torres spread new intelligence reports across his desk, intercepted communications that showed terrorist planning had advanced beyond the attacks we'd already prevented. The Final Harvest operation we've been tracking isn't just about attacking American forces. It's about coordinating with terrorist cells in Europe and the United States to launch simultaneous attacks on military targets and civilian infrastructure. I stared at the intelligence reports, understanding immediately why my continued presence in Afghanistan was critical. Sir, this is a coordinated international terrorism operation. Exactly. And your expertise in Middle Eastern terrorist communication patterns is essential to understanding how this international coordination is being managed. How many people are at risk? If this operation succeeds, we're looking at potential casualties in the thousands: military personnel, civilian contractors, possibly American civilians if the domestic terrorist cells succeed in their coordination. Thousands of people. Thousands of families who would be devastated if I couldn't decode the terrorist communications that would allow us to prevent these attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, I need to ask you directly, are your family obligations going to interfere with your ability to focus on this mission? I thought about my mother's ultimatum, Ashley's growing understanding, Derek's brother Kevin, who was serving in the region where my intelligence work was preventing attacks. Sir, my family obligations will not interfere with mission performance. Good, because what we're facing now isn't just about preventing attacks on American forces in Afghanistan. We're looking at a coordinated international terrorist operation that could affect national security on multiple continents. That night, I called Ashley one more time, knowing it might be the last conversation with my family for months. Jade, I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you're really doing over there. Ashley, I can't discuss details, but the situation has become more serious than what I described before. More serious how? I can't say, but Ashley, I need you to understand that I might not be able to communicate with family for a while. The work I'm doing has become critically important to national security. Are you in danger? I thought about the terrorist communications I was analyzing, the international coordination I was trying to decode, the potential for retaliation against American intelligence operations. I'm as safe as anyone can be in Afghanistan, but the work has become more important than I can explain. What do you want me to tell Mom?
She's still angry about Dad's surgery, still convinced that you've chosen the army over family. Tell her that I love her, that I love all of you, and that everything I'm doing here is about protecting people we care about. What if she asks when you're coming home? Tell her I don't know. Tell her that the work I'm doing might prevent thousands of people from dying and that I can't walk away from that responsibility. Thousands? I realized I'd said too much again, revealed information that should have remained classified.
Ashley, I can't discuss specifics. Just tell Mom that I'm doing work that matters, work that protects people like Kevin, work that keeps American families safe. I will, but Jade, she might not listen. She might not forgive you for missing Dad's surgery. I know. But Ashley, some responsibilities are bigger than personal forgiveness. Some duties require sacrificing relationships for the greater good. I'm starting to understand that, but it's going to break her heart. It's breaking my heart too. But breaking my heart is better than letting thousands of people die because I couldn't do my job. After the call, I sat alone in my quarters, surrounded by classified intelligence that detailed terrorist plans to kill thousands of people, knowing that my expertise was the primary tool for preventing those attacks. My family would never understand that I wasn't choosing the army over them. I was choosing to prevent other families from experiencing the devastation of losing someone they loved. But understanding the necessity of that choice didn't make it hurt any less. For 3 weeks, I worked 18-hour days analyzing the international terrorist coordination that Colonel Torres had described. The intelligence was more complex than anything I had encountered in 15 years of military service. A web of communications spanning 7 countries, involving dozens of terrorist cells, coordinated through cultural references and linguistic patterns that required my specific expertise to decode. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying. Simultaneous attacks planned for American military bases in Afghanistan, Syria, and Germany. Coordination with domestic terrorist cells targeting military recruitment centers in Texas, Virginia, and California. Supply chain attacks designed to disrupt American military operations across 3 continents. If successful, the operation could kill thousands of American military personnel and civilians while crippling American defense capabilities globally. I hadn't spoken to my family in 3 weeks. Ashley had tried calling twice, but I'd been in classified briefings both times. My mother hadn't attempted contact at all. The isolation was crushing, but the work was too critical to allow personal distractions. Every hour of analysis potentially saved lives. Every decoded communication prevented attacks that could devastate American families I would never meet. Then on a Thursday morning that started like any other, everything changed. Colonel Torres called me into his office at 0600, his expression unreadable as he gestured for me to sit across from his desk. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, I've received communications from the Pentagon that directly relate to your personal situation. My stomach clenched. Had my family contacted my commanding officers? Had they filed complaints about my failure to return for family emergencies? Sir? It appears that your family has been in contact with their congressional representative about your deployment situation. Representative? My family had contacted a member of Congress about my military service? Congressman Bradley Walsh from Oregon's 2nd District received a letter from your mother requesting intervention in your deployment status. The letter claims that you've been deployed indefinitely without consideration for family medical emergencies. I felt heat rising in my face, a mixture of embarrassment and anger that my family would try to use political pressure to interfere with military operations. Sir, I can explain. Lieutenant Colonel, before you say anything, you should know that Congressman Walsh forwarded your mother's letter to the Secretary of Defense with a request for review of your deployment status. The Secretary of Defense. The highest level of military leadership was now aware that my family considered my deployment unreasonable.
Sir, my family doesn't understand the nature of military deployments. They don't realize that personal circumstances don't override operational requirements. Actually, Lieutenant Colonel, that's not entirely accurate. Colonel Torres pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before, marked with classification levels that indicated Pentagon-level communications. The Secretary of Defense has reviewed your deployment situation, your service record, and the operational importance of your intelligence analysis work. What was the conclusion? The conclusion is that you've performed above and beyond reasonable expectations for military service. 15 years of deployments, specialized expertise that has prevented countless attacks, personal sacrifices that go well beyond normal military obligations. I wasn't sure where this was heading. Lieutenant Colonel Raven, the Secretary of Defense has authorized immediate leave for you to return home and address your family situation. Sir, the international terrorist coordination analysis isn't complete. My presence here is critical to preventing. The analysis you have provided over the past 3 weeks has allowed us to coordinate with international intelligence agencies to disrupt the terrorist networks before they could execute their planned attacks. Colonel Torres opened the folder and spread documents across his desk, showing the results of operations I hadn't known were taking place. Based on your intelligence analysis, coordinated operations in 7 countries resulted in the arrest of 43 suspected terrorists and the seizure of weapons and explosives that would have been used in the attacks you identified. 43 arrests? 7 countries? The international terrorist operation had been prevented. The operation has been neutralized, Lieutenant Colonel. Your expertise was essential to that success, and the American lives you've saved number in the thousands. Sir, I don't understand. Why is the Pentagon granting leave based on a congressional inquiry from my family? Colonel Torres smiled, the first time I'd seen him show any emotion other than professional concern. Because, Lieutenant Colonel Raven, the Secretary of Defense reviewed your service record and realized that in 15 years of military service, you've never once requested personal leave for family obligations. You've never missed a deployment, never asked for accommodations, never prioritized personal needs over military requirements. That's just doing my job, sir. No, Lieutenant Colonel, that's exceptional dedication that goes beyond normal military service. The Secretary determined that someone who has sacrificed personal relationships for 15 years in service to her country deserves the opportunity to repair those relationships. I stared at the documents on Colonel Torres's desk, trying to process what I was hearing. Sir, are you ordering me to take leave? I'm ordering you to go home, Lieutenant Colonel. Address your family situation, explain what your military service actually involves, and give them the opportunity to understand what you've been doing for 15 years.
And after the leave? After leave, you'll be reassigned to the Pentagon for a position in strategic intelligence analysis. No more deployments to combat zones, no more extended separations from family. It's time for you to use your expertise in a role that allows for a more sustainable work-life balance. Work-life balance, the phrase my family had been using for years, never understanding that military intelligence work didn't allow for such luxuries. Sir, I'm not sure my family is interested in understanding my military service at this point. The damage to our relationships might be permanent. Ashley was quiet as we walked to her car, clearly struggling with how to summarize a conversation that had apparently changed our family's understanding of my military service. He told us about Kevin, about how your intelligence work prevented attacks that would have killed soldiers in Kevin's unit. Kevin is fine? Kevin is fine because of work you did, Jade. Work that prevented terrorist attacks specifically targeting his base. We drove in silence through the familiar landscape of Oregon, passing the exit from Millfield, where I'd grown up, where my parents still lived, where everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left 18 years ago to join the military. Ashley, what did Congressman Walsh tell you about my work? He said that you're not just a regular intelligence analyst. He said you have specialized expertise that makes you one of the most valuable counterterrorism specialists in the American military. We thought you were choosing career advancement over family loyalty, Dad added. We never realized you were choosing to save other people's families at the cost of relationships with your own family. Ashley wiped away tears. Jade, when Congressman Walsh explained what you've actually been doing, I realized something terrible. Every time we made you feel guilty about missing family events, we were making you feel guilty about saving people's lives. That's not... It is, though. We were making you choose between disappointing us and letting Americans die. And then we were punishing you emotionally for making the right choice. The conversation continued for hours, with my family asking questions about military service, national security, and the moral obligations that came with specialized expertise in preventing terrorist attacks. For the first time in 15 years, they were trying to understand my career from my perspective, rather than demanding that I adjust my career to meet their expectations. But the most important conversation happened that evening, when Mom and I sat alone on the back porch where I'd played as a child. Jade, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Do you resent us for not understanding your military service? For 15 years of making you feel guilty about doing work that saves people's lives? I thought about 15 years of missed holidays, family gatherings where I felt like an outsider, constant guilt about prioritizing duty over personal relationships. Mom, I don't resent you for not understanding. Most civilians have no framework for understanding what military service actually involves, especially classified intelligence work. That's not what I asked, Jade. I asked if you resent us. Sometimes I felt angry that you couldn't trust my work was important, even when I couldn't explain the details. Sometimes I felt like you thought I was selfish or uncaring, when I was actually trying to protect people. We did think that. We thought you were using military obligations as an excuse to avoid family responsibilities. I know. Jade, how do we move forward from this? How do we rebuild our relationship when we've spent 15 years fundamentally misunderstanding what your life has been about? I looked at my mother, seeing not just the woman who'd raised me, but someone who was genuinely trying to understand choices she'd never had to make. Mom, I think we start by accepting that military families face challenges that other families don't face. We accept that sometimes duty to country requires sacrificing personal relationships for the greater good. But how do we balance that with our need to have you as part of our family? We find ways to maintain connection that don't require me to compromise national security or abandon responsibilities that keep people alive. What does that look like practically? It looks like understanding that I might miss family events when my work is critical. It looks like trusting that when I can't come home, it's because people's lives depend on the work I'm doing. And what can we do to support you better? You can remember that missing family events hurts me too. You can remember that I'm not choosing work over family. I'm choosing to prevent other families from losing people they love. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Jade, I'm proud of you. I should have said that 15 years ago, and I should have said it every day since then. I'm proud of the work you do, I'm proud of the lives you've saved, and I'm proud of the sacrifices you've made to serve your country. Thank you, Mom. That means more to me than you know. But I also need you to understand something. Even knowing what I know now about your work, it's still hard to be the mother of someone whose job requires her to choose strangers over family. I know it's hard. Do you think you can help us learn how to be a military family? How to support your service without resenting the sacrifices it requires? I thought about the next phase of my career, the Pentagon assignment that would allow me to continue intelligence work while maintaining more regular contact with family. Mom, my next assignment is going to be different. I'll be working in Washington, D.C., but I'll be able to come home for holidays and family events. No more combat deployments, no more extended separations. Really? The Pentagon has decided that after 15 years of deployments, I've earned an assignment that allows for better work-life balance. What changed?
I think the military finally recognized that exceptional service shouldn't require permanent separation from family, that even the most dedicated service members deserve the opportunity to maintain personal relationships.
Mom smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since coming home. So we get to learn how to be a normal family? We get to learn how to be a military family that sees each other more than once or twice a year. I'd like that, Jade. I'd like that very much. The Pentagon assignment was everything Colonel Torres had promised. Strategic intelligence analysis that used my expertise in terrorist communications without requiring deployment to combat zones. Regular hours that allowed for weekend trips home to Oregon. Work that was critically important to national security, but didn't require choosing between duty and family on a daily basis. Ashley gave birth to a healthy daughter, Emma, in March. I was there for the delivery, holding my sister's hand through 12 hours of labor and becoming the first person other than Ashley and Derek to hold my niece. Dad's recovery from heart surgery was complete, and he'd started asking detailed questions about my military service, trying to understand what intelligence analysis actually involved. He'd even started reading military history books, developing an appreciation for the complexity of national security work. Mom had joined a support group for military families, connecting with other parents whose children served in the armed forces. She'd discovered that many military families faced similar challenges balancing service obligations with family relationships. But the most significant change was in how we talked about my career. Instead of treating military service as an inconvenience that kept me away from family, they began to understand it as meaningful work that required certain sacrifices. Aunt Jade became Emma's favorite person as she grew old enough to recognize faces, and I spent weekends teaching her to say Dada and Mama, while Ashley and Derek got desperately needed sleep. During one of these weekend visits, Ashley and I sat on the same back porch where Mom and I had reconciled, watching Emma play with toys in the autumn sunshine. Jade, do you ever regret choosing military service over a more conventional life? I thought about 15 years of deployments, missed holidays, and difficult choices between duty and personal preferences. I regret the pain it caused our family. I regret that you spent so many years feeling abandoned. But I don't regret the work itself. Because of the lives you saved? Because military service gave me the opportunity to use my skills and training to protect people. Not just American soldiers, but families like ours, communities like Millfield, people who deserve to live their lives without fear of terrorist attacks. Do you think you'll stay in the military until retirement? I think I'll stay as long as I can contribute meaningfully to national security. The work I'm doing now at the Pentagon allows me to use 15 years of experience to train other analysts, to share the expertise I've developed. So you get to save lives and teach other people to save lives. Something like that. Emma looked up from her toys and reached toward me, wanting to be picked up. As I lifted her, I thought about the world she would grow up in, the threats she would never know about because people like me worked to prevent them. Ashley, do you understand now why I couldn't come home for Dad's surgery? I understand that the choice you made protected hundreds of families from losing people they love. I understand that your absence during our crisis prevented other families from experiencing much worse crises. And do you forgive me for making that choice? Ashley was quiet for a moment, watching Emma play with my dog tags. Jade, there's nothing to forgive. You did your job. You saved lives. You served your country with honor and dedication. But I missed Dad's surgery. And because you missed Dad's surgery, Kevin came home safely from Afghanistan. Because you missed Dad's surgery, terrorist attacks were prevented that could have killed thousands of Americans. Does that make it worth it? I think that's a question only you can answer. But I know that I'm proud to have a sister who would make that choice, who would sacrifice her own happiness to protect other people. As we sat on that porch in Oregon, watching my niece play in the autumn sunshine, I realized that my family had finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them for 15 years. Military service isn't about choosing strangers over family. It's about understanding that your family is part of a larger community that deserves protection, and sometimes protecting that community requires personal sacrifices that are difficult but necessary. My family had learned that lesson the hard way, through 15 years of feeling abandoned and a congressional inquiry that revealed what my military service had actually accomplished. But they had learned it. And that made every missed holiday, every deployment, every difficult choice between duty and personal preference worth the sacrifice. Because now, finally, I had both: a military career that protected American lives and a family that understood why that work mattered enough to require the sacrifices it demanded. The woman who had spent 15 years feeling guilty about choosing duty over family obligations had finally found a way to honor both commitments without compromising either. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.